Hey folks, it's a lovely spring day up here in Chicago, and we've got some updates from the balcony garden up here. So I figured we'd just take another brief tour over the balcony pot, Flora, just to give you guys an update, because there is some cool stuff happening that has occurred since the last video, and honestly, most of it, the star of the show, we're gonna discuss him later, but he's sitting right there on the center table in the spotlight of the noonday sun. Arnoglossum plantagineum, folks. Anyways, gonna be a fun video. Let's get into it. So first things first, we're just going to move through the pots sequentially, just as we did in the previous video. You might be asking yourself, Nate, what's going on with the weedy pots? And I'll tell you, I'm doing mad science with the Solidagos right now. As you can see, you'll note right away from a comparison of these two, one of these has clearly been topped. And the reason that these are topped is because I'm employing a gardening technique that I learned about on Instagram known as the Chelsea Chop. I would assume it's named after like Chelsea, England, or the United Kingdom, or whatever the fuck. Anyways, the Chelsea Chop, the way you do it, you find a leaf axle, you go a little bit above it, and you cut at a 45-degree angle. And the reason you might employ this technique is because it prevents flopping, and it's also supposed to encourage branching. So what I might get as a result of employing this is a sturdier Solidago and one that produces more flower heads. Okay, because the Solidagos, as a lot of people might know, when you see them in the field, they tend to nod a lot, like they kind of, they're like a shepherd's crook a little bit, you might say. That's a good way to note a Solidago before it goes off and flowers. But anyways, so as you can see, I've got two clumps of Solidago, two genetic individuals, two rhizomatous colonies right here. I've got these four who I did not chop. And then I've got this bunch over here. Oh, let me get the Origeron out of there. And then I've got this bunch over here who I did chop. So we're going to see. So, they are different genetic individuals, so that's a variable that I'll have to consider when I analyze my results, of course. But I'm intrigued to see how this goes. If these Solidagos throw up a bunch more flower heads, I'll be using this technique, the Chelsea Chop, a lot more. So I did that. That's new mad science for you. How about that? Another new thing we've got going on is the arrival of Elymus hystrix, or Hystrix patula, as I prefer to call it, actually. And the reason I prefer to put this in its own genus of Hystrix rather than Elymus is because in the flowers of Hystrix patula, you'll note that the glooms are, I believe the key says absent to heavily reduced is the terminology used. So basically this guy, when he flowers, doesn't really have any glooms. However, you'll note in members of the genus Elymus, the wild rhys, you'll note that the glooms of the flowers are pretty well developed. And on a diversionary note here, the Elymuses are a great group of grasses to get started on. If you're trying to break into the wild west of the Poaceae, start with the Elymuses and the Bromuses. The flowers in those groups are pretty big. They're pretty easy to work with without a microscope if you've just got a hand lens. I acquired a dissecting scope for my ventures into the Poaceae, which was quite helpful. I mostly got into the Poaceae because one of my friends at work used to give me shit for not knowing about them. He was like, oh, you're a pretty sorry excuse for a botanist. You don't know anything about grasses. And there's some validity there, because the grasses are a cornerstone foundational group of plants as far as I'm concerned. If you ever eat corn, corn, wheat, any of those grains, you should probably pay more attention to the Poaceae. But that's beside the point. Hystrix patula right here. It's also sentimentally very valuable to me, because when I was first dating my partner, they collected a specimen of a grass for me, and they wanted to know what it was, and it was Hystrix patula. So I keep a what's left of a bottle brush grass flower head in my car, and I grow it because I'm just a huge sentimental sap. Whatever. That's Hystrix patula. Really cool to see it growing. We'll move down into the sand simulation pot. I've got two updates here. One, I've never done this well growing Lupinus perennis. I have never had Lupinus perennis throw up 3 true leaves, but I've got a couple of them, and there's one up here. Yeah, you see it in the back of the pot there. So I've got a few of them that have actually managed to throw up 3 true leaves, so I'm doing pretty well on the Lupinus perennis game. Obviously not going to flower this year, but really cool to see that development happening. What I wanted to highlight is a different Fabid, as I'm sure you could tell by the compound leaves on this one. I had been keeping this one quiet because he looked like shit and I was too embarrassed to show it off, but it's doing well now. This is Astragalus canadensis, the Canadian milk vetch. It's a really, really cool plant in the Fabaceae, as I've mentioned like 3 times now. What else do I want to note about this? I wild collected the seed at Loyola Beach because they've got a good population of it, and I had never seen the plant before that, but I knew it right away because it's got very unique flowers. As you can see, there's like spider webs all over this. Another spider web right there. We get a lot of orb weavers on the porch. Pretty cool. Not as cool as the Astragalus canadensis though. Don't have any pictures of the flowers to show you guys, unfortunately, but that's doing well now, so I can show it off. Anyways, let's move right along. The Opuntia cespitosa seedlings are doing quite well. As you can see, that pad is neatly developing. I'll put my fingertip near it for a size comparison. So it's not very large yet, but it's still clearly a cactus pad, you know, as is this one over here. This one's even further along, actually. A little bit bigger. As you can see, starting to get some of those cacti spines. So I'm going to start needing to be a little bit more careful if I haven't needed to weed this particular window basket, actually, which is neat. But anyway, that's Opuntia cespitosa. Just thought I'd show that off because it's really cool. And then we'll get into the star of the show, as it were. So enough preface, let's talk about the coolest plant that I have in my possession, Arnoglossum plantagineum. I'll give you the backstory of these plants. It starts out in 2016. My boss at my current restoration job, she found out about a railroad expansion while she was doing restoration work at someplace in southern Illinois. I forget the exact locality, but besides the point, she finds out about a railroad expansion, so a ton of plants are going to get put to the sword. So what she does is she does a plant rescue, and she gets a couple of Arnoglossum plantagineums. And now we fast forward to 2025, and this Arnoglossum plantagineum rescues, they're so fruitful and productive that they're basically like, I can't believe I'm saying it, but they're like practically a weed at headquarters. Like, I had to transplant 14 of these things that were about this size. And this is, you know, like a good 8-inch pot, if I'm not 6-inch, 8-inch pot. But anyways, a bunch of plants about this size. I had to transplant 14 of them. One of them, the root system was so advanced that it snapped the handle of the trowel I was using, and I had to bust out my ditch digging shovel. But anyways, so the rescues were very fruitful, and they're so fruitful, and I was so good at transplanting them that I was rewarded with 2 Arnoglossum plantagineums, which is fantastic. This plant has a lot of sentimental value to me. I call it prairie fen plantain, even though it's not a plantain at all. It's a member of the Asteraceae. But that habitat, the prairie fen, is very near and dear to my heart. In fact, after a visit to a prairie fen that was particularly riveting, I got this tattoo of Carex leptolia, which is the widest distributed carex in North America. It was carpeting the floor of the prairie fen, but the star of the show that day was the mass blooming of Arnoglossum plantagineum that was in progress, which was just incredible to witness. I saw some orchids too, but this aster takes precedent. And this one looks pretty good. He's standing up very sturdy, very healthily, like an Arnoglossum should. This one that's in the shade right now, they're in a bit of transplant shock. So as you can see, they're much floppier, which is a very technical scientific term. But I've done some things to mitigate the transplant stress, transplant shock, whatever you want to call it. I'm keeping it out of direct sunlight because that can be a bit harsh. That's what the shade cloth, this bin, you know, provides good shadow, good coverage to keep it out of the harsh sunlight. Anyways, I'm doing that. I'm watering frequently. I've added mulch to kind of help with water retention. Another thing you can do is fertilize. I would dilute that fertilizer by half just to prevent root burn, because basically to combat transplant shock, the thing you want to do is provide as cushy and just as cushy and easygoing of an environment as you can for that plant, because it's gonna need to recoup a little bit, because this is a living thing that you've just cut up part of the storage organ of. So, you know, another note about transplanting is you want to get as much of the root as possible. So like I use I think it's called a trenching shovel. It's a very long bladed, narrower shovel. But what I do is I cut a circle about the plant that's usually pretty wide. Like I would have liked to have made it wider with this one, but I couldn't because there was other desirable vegetation that was staying there in the garden bed. It was a shorter vegetation bed, and the Arnoglossum's getting a bit tall, so they didn't want the little creeping stuff to get shaded out, basically. So that's how I ended up transplanting 14 of them and getting this one too. But anyways, so yeah, so we're just going to monitor this one closely, tend to it very neatly, but both of these plants are big enough to flower, so hopefully that's an update I can show you guys as well. But there you have it, Arnoglossum plantagineum, and those are my pot atos, which is hilarious. It's a bunch of potatoes that I'm growing in a pot. They sprouted in the bag. Anyways, have a good one, folks.